Atlanta United kicking off their 2024 season against the defending MLS Cup champions, the Columbus Crew. This is Scarves and Spikes. Sydney, Tyler, and Tommy with you, along with a familiar face and a familiar voice that you all know, calling the match with Danny Higginbotham from Lower.com Field on Saturday for MLS Season Pass is Steve Cangialosi. Steve, how are you?
We had so much fun calling the playoff series between these two teams. You think they were going to leave us out of this one on opening day? No way, guys.
Absolutely.
Good to see you.
Absolutely. Always good to have you on. So, let's just get right into it. Columbus Crew, not the hunted or the hunters right now, but they are the hunted. They are the defending MLS Cup champions. You called the game between Atlanta and Columbus last year, the playoffs. And you just got off the phone with Wilfred Nancy. You were telling us before the show. What's the conversations you had with him, and what's kind of this outlook for Saturday? And thanks so far with Champions Cup before this.
Yeah, and you are absolutely on spot on how you put that in perspective. They are the hunted this season. And if you want to make a case that Inter Miami is on same footing, just on star power and attention alone, fine. I think there's part of that that's fair. But this is the MLS Cup champion. And I think, as you guys know fully, if you go back to 2018, people don't remember that the Red Bulls won Supporters Shield that year. They remember who claimed and lifted the trophy on the final day of the season, and that was the Tata Martino-led Atlanta team, which I know lives in lore for you and the rest of the fan base down there some years later. This is a team that's turning it around very quickly. This is the earliest start to an MLS season that we've ever had. We're kicking off on February 21st, and of course, they were one of the two teams to wrap it up as late as possible for good reason, right? They wound up winning it all, and there was a lot of time and energy expended to do that. They feel they're in a good place because for Nancy, who's a wonderful coach, they're not starting from square one this time. He's not coming in as a first-year coach of that team. The systematic things are in place already. Now it's just a question of executing, and then they believe they have the guns to do it.
Yeah, just look at the roster, very few changes. Of course, Gressel, who is kind of a role player for this team, is now in Miami. You have Kucho coming back. You have Christian Ramirez coming back. Malte Admundsen, Schulte, who is terrific in net, one of the top young goalkeepers in the league. So a lot of the pieces from last year are there. And we've talked about leading up to this, the Eastern Conference is just going to be stacked. And there's no reason to believe that Columbus won't be at or near the top again in 2024, just in my opinion.
This is one of the great storylines, I think, going into the season, because I think there are 12 teams in the East, no fewer than 12 teams in the East that line up either tonight, as we're taping this on Wednesday, Real Salt Lake and Inter Miami, or over the weekend, 12 teams who all rightfully believe they are playoff teams going into this season. I think the caveats going in are Charlotte, who I think will go through a transition year. Montreal has to find its footing. And Toronto can escape that group that we're not taking seriously very quickly if the two from Italy play the way we know that they can play. But everybody else, I think, has strong reason to believe they're a top 7 team, if not a little bit more, in the Eastern Conference. And I think Atlanta's a perfect example of that. I don't think they'll fall short again of some of their stated goals. The obvious one is a top 4 finish and home field advantage in the first round of the playoffs this year.
We've talked a lot about the changes with Atlanta in the offseason. Obviously, Columbus, maybe not as many. They had some changes as well. But the biggest thing is the point that you made earlier with Wilfred Nancy now having a year in. I mean, they did the job the first year, but now you've got the chemistry. You have the benefit of having a little bit of consistency. So Atlanta goes and tries to shore up a little bit of the defensive lapses they had last season. These two teams, I hope you have your vocal cords ready. But these two teams had 23 goals between them last season. What do you think it's going to be anything close to that? I mean, obviously this is the first match, but do you think the goal scoring kind of prowess is still going to be there with all the work both of these teams have done?
I think on opening week it will be, because I think there's going to be a process in getting to that defensive place where you want to be. Obviously, that is a source of concern for Gonzalo Pineda, and the most glaring area where that team does need to improve. Of all the teams to qualify for the postseason, they leaked the most goals. I don't think they want to go into a 2024 postseason anywhere near that conversation. And I think that they've done some things to help shore that up, and I'll be surprised if they're not better in that respect. The goalkeeping issue, I think, is something to keep an eye on. Now, I don't equate goalkeeping controversies with quarterback controversies in the NFL, because I think the latter is something that has the capability to rip apart a team and rip apart a locker room. That's been very rare that that's happened in Major League Soccer. Maybe you can point to an instance in Toronto a couple of years ago. But I think there's that fact-finding process of, we're going to find the best option here. Is it Guzan? Is it Cohen? And I think that decision has to be made relatively quickly, guys, not in the opening weeks of the season, but by the time the warm weather rolls around in May, I think that has to be established. And Brad Guzan probably doesn't want any part of this conversation at this particular time, but you know him. I know him. I've spoken to him many, many times. And if he has to accept that number 2 role, he will accept it, I think, as positively as anybody in that situation possibly can. He knows this is the twilight of his career, but there's that professional element and a prideful element where he wants to go out the number 1 guy. Chiellini's no longer in this league. He'll start opening week as the oldest player in Major League Soccer, and he knows that.
So who do you think starts on Saturday?
I think it's Guzan. Now, in all fairness, I haven't spoken to the coaches in Atlanta yet. I'm about to do that as we get a little bit closer to game day. So, see, I got myself off the hook with that very difficult question. I didn't have to be a straight shooter with you. I think it'll start with Guzan, and then I think it will be, at least in the interim here, the opening moments of the season, Cohen's job to win it outright. And that's a hard thing to do, I think, once the preseason is over. Look, the manner in which Atlanta plays, and I still think they want to teeter on the edge of, we're going to outscore you 4-2. The door will be open for Guzan to make mistakes. The question is, does he make enough of them in order to open that door for Cohen to come in sooner rather than later?
For sure. And we've been arguing about it now for the past couple of weeks on who's going to start. But I'm with you. I think Brad gets the opportunity to keep the job as the veteran. I think it looks bad if he loses it. But Steve, you're a hockey guy and I'm a hockey guy. And this best of 3 series, they just announced it's continuing. The playoff format's going to continue. How do you feel about the 3-game series? Because to me, that first round almost felt like a hockey series, because as it went on, it started getting more aggressive. You got guys throwing Spider-Man masks on left and right against each other. And now we're on opening day, and I'm ready for it, because after a 7-game series, when it goes into the next season, they don't forget what happened in that 7-game series.
Well, I think that the animosity is more likely to build up over 3 games rather than 1. So in that sense, and I said this last year when I talked to you guys, I liked it, okay? If you want to point to some flaws in this playoff system, be my guest. I'm still of the belief that 9 teams going into a postseason from one conference is still too much, okay? But this 3-game series that you are specifically talking about, I have no issue with it. And I think the playoffs last year were tremendous. And the series itself between Columbus and Atlanta was such a fun thing over a span of 8 days. I know Danny and I just had a ball calling it. Now, I'm not sure how much of that carries over into 2024, months later. Momentum is kind of a real fluky thing. But I think from an individualist perspective, take a player like Muyumba, right? The whole thing practically blew up 45 minutes into his first playoff with Atlanta, right? Some of that was him getting unhinged. Some of that was Columbus having him get unhinged because they're so darn hard to take the ball away. But, he's one guy that months later wants to come in and really redeem himself with the eyes of the league watching right after they raise their championship banner, and he's going to be in position to do it. That element, I have no issue with it. I would not mind seeing this format with that best of three continuing. Personally, I'd get rid of 8-9, but apparently that's not the way the league's going right now.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, we talked about the new signings for Atlanta, and the focus was really on the spine of the team. Slish coming in from Legia Warsaw, Gregerson coming in from second division of France, continuing that pipeline that Atlanta United have built. Excuse me, Cohen coming in as well. So, and Dax McCarty, a player you know very well from your time with the Red Bulls, coming in over as well from Nashville as a free agent. So, a lot of new pieces for Atlanta United. How quickly do you think this team can gel? And then B, how important is it for players like Giakoumakis, who almost won the Golden Boot last year, for Silva, for Sabalovnica going through their first preseasons with Atlanta United? How important is that as they look to capitalize on what they did in the latter half of last season when they first came in with Atlanta United?
So you're addressing a lot of areas there, right? And I'll do my best to do the full scope here for you. Midfield, I think, is something that's very interesting on this team. Dax McCarty, I'll get a chance to talk with as we go a little closer to first kick on Saturday. I'll be shocked if he doesn't play 2,000 minutes minimum for this team this year. He's not obviously projected as a starter. We all know that. But here's the thing about Dax. Yeah, he's going into his 19th season in Major League Soccer. He's still very motivated. He's never won MLS Cup. That's a big part of this for him. And the durability of Dax through the years has been something that's so admirable. If you look back, he has played 20 or more MLS games each of the last 15 years. He's not going to fall off the cliff all at once. And I think he's a perfect complement to how Atlanta really wants to line up in the midfield. I'll reference Muyumba again for this reason. I thought he was at his best when he knew the safety net was there with Mateus Osetu last year. It gave him the freedom to advance into the attack and complement all the wonderful things that the two wings that you referenced, Giakoumakis, who might be the best number 9 in the league, and of course Thiago Almada, do on any given day. But if Slish can come in and he can provide at minimum that same safety net for him, if not give him a little bit more rope, then I think Muyumba becomes a very interesting watch for this team this season. And for those reasons and more, and I'm not dismissing the loss of Miles Robinson, that's not insignificant, I think this is a top 4 or 5 team in the Eastern Conference this year.
So we're 12 and a half minutes, excuse me, 12 and a half minutes in, we made our first mention of Thiago Almada. So yeah, obviously you can't overstate his importance to this team. So kind of a twofold question on him. One, are you surprised that he wasn't sold in the winter window? And then two, do you worry that if and when he is sold, and it's like 9 out of 10 chance he's going to be sold in the summer, do you worry that there's going to be drop off in this team to the point where they may slip out of that top 4 spot? I mean, Atlanta will have a replacement in place.
Yes,
we imagine by the time he does get sold. But do you worry there's going to be drop off in the team as this new signer, this player X coming in for Almada, gets his legs underneath him?
How can there not be? How can there not be if you're saying goodbye to Almada in the summer? And that's not to say it's not good business for Garth Lagerwey, okay? Was I surprised that he didn't go over the winter? Kind of, but I wasn't shocked because it's easier to move these players to Europe in the summer. That has really been established in recent years for MLS as the trading commodity began to get a little bit hotter for teams in this league, okay? But I look back at what he did last season, and you go back to a 19 assist season for Thiago Almada. Sometimes I don't think that was celebrated enough last year, because what took place last season, where our attention went, it was largely to the well-deserved MVP talents of Luciano Acosta. Obviously, Messi comes into the league, and that takes up 90% of the air in the room. We all know that. And then the run that Columbus goes on last year as they come together as a team. But look at what Almada did last year. You guys know what Miguel Almiron meant to the history of this franchise. In the 2 full seasons that he played for Atlanta, he capped out at 14 assists each of those years. And he had Josef Martinez. Granted, it's going to be Almada with the elite striker Yorgos Giacomakis. That aids him numerically. But sometimes I think we brush past a little too quickly how he performed last season. It all started with the big heroics on opening day. We know that. But if you're my advice to people in Atlanta, enjoy him for the next 5 months. Okay. You don't know what's going to happen after that. I do think, just based on what Thiago said, he openly came out in December and said, I want to go to Europe and I want to go now. Didn't work out, but he's not alone, guys. It should have worked out for Carranza in Philadelphia. We were hearing John Tolkien was a goner in New York, and they're all coming back to start MLS once again. So it's not that unique. Problem for Almada, the price tag is going to be somewhere, we estimate, between 25 and 30 million. There are only so many teams in the world that can make those numbers work.
I agree. And the thing with Almada too is, I think at this point the fan base has kind of come to that not so happy conclusion that it's limited. It's limited with Almada. You just, like you said, you have to enjoy him while he's here, because he's a special player. And I think you also have to trust the front office in the sense that, they already have a list a mile long of players that they would prefer to have come in to replace Almada. I do have a question, though, going back to our good friend Dax McCarty. And I have to ask you, first of all, are you aware of his recent social media posts?
No, I am not.
Okay. I'm going to enlighten you, because we talked to him at training a couple of weeks ago before they went to Florida for preseason. We are trying to solve a mystery. And so I would like for you.
Oh, is this about the coffee?
Yeah.
It is indeed about the coffee. Butter in coffee. Is this a thing you've ever heard of?
No, it's not. Have we identified the guilty party, guys? And are you willing to tell me if you've identified it?
Not yet.
We're putting you on the mission.
Oh, so you want me to get it out of him? Yeah, I'll do my best, but don't expect too much success in that area. Yeah, I thought this was hilarious, and this is done by design, guys. It's a nice way to connect with the fans about non-footballing things, and I'm sure it got a laugh or two in the locker room, and that's a perfect example of the small, somewhat stupid things that kind of bring teams together when we don't realize what the dynamic of the locker room is in the first place.
That's one of those intangibles, right? That I've been we preach on it all the time, but what you see on the pitch, it is very much a product of what happens off the pitch. And we've had conversations. We've had Noah Cobb on the show. We had Tyler Wolf. We've chatted with other players, Saba Lobjanidze yesterday at training ground. And we bring up the coffee thing and they just start cracking up. They think it's hilarious. So how important over the years, not just in soccer, but in the sports that you've covered, how important are those intangibles for a team?
I think they're very important. Dax, when I covered him on a day-to-day basis in New York, was part of the leadership council of that Red Bull side. The only thing surprising to me about that post is that he's not heavily into the jocularity, okay? He is somebody who is very well spoken, obviously. I can see him working with us on Season Pass next year if he wants to do that at some point in his life, okay? He's the go-to guy for interviews for anybody who's ever covered him, and he's a smart fella, okay? And I meant what I said. He knows what he's doing when he posts things like that. Teams come together, I think, in many different ways. This is a better question, I think, for co-commentators rather than play-by-play guys, because most of them have sat in that professional locker room. And not to defer entirely to Danny Higginbotham when you talk to him or anybody else, but I think that dynamic in a locker room quite often is what carries you. And I think the character of the people who make up that dynamic is important. Atlanta's going to line up against Columbus this weekend, right? One of the great things that Wilfred Nancy did last year, he converted Malte Amundsen and Steven Moreira from fullbacks to center backs. Okay. Who does that? Who does that? A coach with great vision. But as it relates to your question, you can only do that with guys who buy in. And guys are going to buy in when they're really happy in their work setting, and they're going to be willing to step outside their comfort zone to do what's necessary to win. The best teams I've covered have had that in MLS and elsewhere. Yes.
Absolutely. So I'm going to put you really quick on the spot. This is a fun one though. I just want to know, and you don't have to say us, but just because you're on an Atlanta podcast. What is your favorite or one of your favorite new kits for the season? Or do you have a new favorite?
You know what? I'm less into the kits than almost anybody you can possibly have on this show. And I'm fascinated by the fuss of the conversation anytime we get to this point in the recycling of these kits, okay? And, look, I still take a great interest in what's happening with Red Bull, right? I had a 20-year association with that broadcast before Apple took over. So I love the kit that they rolled out. Fashion is a very subjective thing, is it not? I mean, there are people who loved the Daniel Patrick kit that they rolled out last year in New York. That gold one. I thought it was a mess. But what do I know? I'm wearing the same sport jacket I wore probably when you guys interviewed me 6 months ago. So I'm going to defer the question to somebody far more sartorial splendor than I can offer on this show.
All right. So
Kevin
again.
I saw the Red Bull one, which is a throwback to like Metro Stars days. I'll give a little shout there, but that's my New York bias showing. You don't care about it.
Well, yeah. What do you think of Atlantis? I'll say that. I'll ask you this. I mean, just your initial thoughts.
What
you
is
guys
that?
got to stand up and move around. You got to model the kit.
The new.
There you go.
Resurgence kits.
That is the new one. You're both wearing it.
Yeah.
My frame of reference is nothing when it comes to these things. I thought that might have been a training kit for all.
No.
But it's a little handsome there. I see what you're doing there with it now. The sky blue is kind of New York City FC color, which might resonate poorly with some people in my corner of the world, but I think they're a wonderful team. Not bad. I'll give it a 7.5 out of 10. Is that a good starting place?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, look, the five stripes define what Atlanta United is, right? And that's kind of why I always look at this. I've seen Barcelona play in so many kits since Thierry Henry was there. So many kits since Messi was there. And, after a while, you just get dizzy with this stuff.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Well, I gave your sports jacket an 8.5 out of 10. So no problem.
Nice. No, it's snowing up here in New York.
Oh, yeah.
Nice wool in the warm in the cold weather up here. Yes.
There you go.
We were just talking. It's supposed to be like 45 degrees up here in Ohio all week, but the one day this game happens, it's going to be in the 20s.
I did see that, but it is clear, and we're expecting sunshine, which is a very big deal. And in the middle of the day, I'm not going to be too bothered by that. I saw the low was supposed to be somewhere like 26 or 27 degrees, but I don't think they're going to approach that with a 2 p.m. kickoff. And I think for this setting, which is a really exciting game, and let's face it, for Columbus, it's a celebration. I think that's wonderful to open up in the daytime.
Yeah.
It's funny, that opening weekend, I'm calling 2 games, both early in the afternoon, because Danny and I have the Cincinnati game the very next day as well, which I like. More of them, please. That's my personal preference.
Yeah. So we'll let you go here in a bit, Steve, but before we do, let's fast forward to December. Who is your pick for MLS Cup?
Okay. I think our friends down in Miami
Mm,
are more equipped to win short tournaments rather than something like Supporters Shield.
hmm.
And I think that they will value things as such. If Messi doesn't play in the Olympics, and I don't think he will, it's possible, but I don't think he will. That would mean he's back for a run at Leagues Cup to defend that title right after Argentina is done with Copa America. And then I think we get into that pattern early in the fall where I can see them taking the foot off the gas a little bit, and they'll surrender a trophy in the process. But Sydney, you're basically asking me to answer this question in the context of everybody's healthy, they're ready to go, they
Yeah,
have a top 7 finish in the Eastern Conference, and now can you just go out and win 5 games? And I think
yeah.
they're equipped to do that. I don't know at this point, you're asking me on February 21st how you argue against Miami, although I'm willing to listen.
No, I mean they have the pieces, but that's a good point. Do they stay healthy? These aren't young players that they have, especially Suarez. But
Yeah, you know the difference between Suarez and Giakoumakis, okay? I mean, if you ask me right now,
Their
who's
knees.
yeah, right? Who's the prototypical striker, right? Giakoumakis to me checks more of the boxes right now only because age factors into a lot of my answer here, right? However, why did Atlanta have only 3 penalty attempts all of last regular season? They need to create more. Giakoumakis won't take penalties as long as Almada is on the team. He also might be going to the Euros. He'll miss time there.
no,
Things that
no,
might affect his Golden Boot chances for Atlanta this season. But Suarez, even if he's not on the field all the time, even if the aging legs start to display themselves, just by virtue of what Busquets and Messi are going to create in the attacking 18, they're going to create penalties, and Suarez is going to take an awful lot of them.
yeah. Gonna be interested to see what happens down there in South Beach, and really what happens across the league as MLS is back on Wednesday and then over the weekend. Steve Cangialosi, always great to have you along, and enjoy the call on Saturday with Danny, and hopefully we'll have you back on soon.
Anytime, guys. I'm looking forward to it. This has the potential to be a great year in MLS. A lot of interesting young faces, too, that we
Yeah,
haven't even talked about yet, maybe at a later time. Thank you so much.
absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Steve.
Thanks.